the application opened yesterday, so you can now log on and use it. So we'll talk through that piece. We'll also talk through the frequently asked questions that we have posted on the site, and have a discussion. If you have questions yourself and want to type in the chat, that would be excellent. One thing I could note that we have, and a lot of the questions we're getting have to do with the disbursement of the premium pay, as far as paying out to the eligible employees, and we understand that's a piece that certainly has complexities, and understand it's very important. It's also a piece, as we tried to note last week, is really the two distinct counts and parts. There's the look back period and the counting the employees for that portion that's needed for the application, and then there's how the funds are paid out. So when we get past the application period, we will be having another training that will go over the disbursement criteria in greater detail, and we'll answer those questions then. And as we're getting questions, we're happy to answer questions on any and all fronts, but we are prioritizing the questions that are coming in related to the application because of the deadline. Which, speaking of the deadline, that's one piece a couple folks have asked and expressed about the short turnaround time for the application, and how more time would be helpful. I think for the context, the reason why we had such a short deadline was we wanted to make sure that we could get the applications processed and funds out the door as quickly as possible to all of you and to your employees. But given that we've looked at schedules and don't want to cause anyone undue consternation and stress and work as well. And so toward that end, Wendy and I have looked and gotten approval to move the deadline to June 1st at 12 noon. So that'll give folks almost an additional week. We hope that'll be helpful. We'll be getting that news up on the website as well. And the toward that end as well, we also really appreciate people who can apply earlier. That allows us two things. It allows us to start processing the applications, which will allow us to ultimately get funds and everything out the door sooner. And secondly, the ones that already started coming in yesterday allowed us to see if there's any bugs when we're moving fast on these things. Even thinking we thoroughly test it, there's always the opportunity for little things to happen, and they did arise. And so both Wendy and I will call out a couple of those items today. But again, thanks to you. The other item before I get started was that one thing that's come up is the SAM number. Wendy will speak to this too, but if you only do one thing, even if your schedule is slammed and you don't get started on the application till next week, if you can look at this, don't have a SAM number and look into getting one, that's the one thing we'd put if you do today, because that can take some time with the site and the requests. And again, Wendy will talk a little bit more about that, but want to flag that one for folks. The other piece, we hit the deadline there. I think those were the major kind of news items to share before getting started. And before jumping into the tips side of it, I'm just going to share my screen for folks who have. I'm guessing most folks have probably seen our website, and this is the link we've pushed out. And there's a couple items here. One thing that will look different is some news we found thanks to folks, thanks to the early appliers. One thing we found out is that on the in the application, it only allowed a full integer to be entered for the FTE, whereas here on the summary report, we're seeing we gave it to a decimal point. And so looking here, I think folks have seen, and Wendy, I'll get the nod. My Excel is showing right. I always get a little nervous with with what I'm sharing to make sure it flips to the right window. So this piece is the same. One piece to call out, a couple people have asked about, is when you enter the names in here, say if you only were to enter one, to say like Main Street adult daycare in Middlebury. There's one issue here, that when you go to pull down that location, it might look like it's not there if you only have one location. If you click that up tab, then you see it. So that's one little Excel item we wanted to call out here. Again, you can either pick the full quarter look back period or the 12-week period. For people who weren't on last week, I encourage you to look at the video and the slide deck we have on that same web page we were just on. I won't go through it all, but this is the piece I want to call out that we did tweak, where we have in bold number of FTEs to enter into application. These numbers here are all calculated, and it's that orange one, the number of FTEs to enter into the application. That's the crucial number. In the version that people would have already used for last week, you would have seen, if you had, say, if it showed 1.1 or 10.1 FTEs here, it would show 10.1. But when you actually got to the application, you'd have to enter an integer. So one thing that we're doing is allowing everybody to round up. If you're at 10.1, you can round up to 11. And you can round up to the closest integer FTE, and this should align. If you've already applied, or if you've already used the first version of the spreadsheet, you don't have to pull this version down. You can use the one you already had. Just when you enter the application, you can you can round up the number. So you can turn in the sheet that says 10.1 here, and you can enter 11 in your application. If you're one of the few folks who applied yesterday and rounded down, then we'll be sending out a note to be able to make that change. So we certainly don't want to penalize anybody who applied early. We want to reward you. We're not giving extra reward, just our gratitude and our ability to get the fair shake, and our thanks for allowing folks to see where we got here. Those were the pieces. The only other question, I think, big question we got related to the FTE spreadsheet was from a couple organizations that are very large. The spreadsheet we made here has up to 490 rows. So you could put 490 full-time employees, 490 part-time employees, 490 vacancies. There are a couple organizations out there that need more, and so by tomorrow we'll be posting an extra large version. Everybody else can continue to use this version. We'll still have this summary report of FTEs version 2 up, so people don't need to take up a ton of space on their hard drives by having thousands of rows, but we will be having those extra rows there for people who need it. The piece here, and I saw one question comes up. We'll answer them all, I think, when we get to the FAQ. Yeah, I think that's probably cleaner, but we will go through this. The one piece I wanted to show next is right here under the online application. Again, you can click on that online application. It will take you in. If you've used applied for Vermont Economic Recovery grants in the past, you can use your existing name and password. If you haven't, you can click where it says register for this program, and then you're going to come into seeing some of these screenshots we have, and Wendy's going to walk us through this part, so don't have to keep hearing my voice for a half hour straight.
Great, thank you, Sean. As you noted, many people here have already received grant awards from the Vermont Economic Recovery Grants, such as hazard pay or healthcare provider stabilization. You likely already have a login, and if you do not recall your password, you could type in your email and click on Forgot Password, and you should receive that in the system. If you do not, you'll see it down the bottom. There's just register for premium pay link. You'll just click on there first and you'll come to this screen. So this here is your registration, which is first asking if you meet minimum eligibility for the program. So you would indicate here, yes, you are an eligible employer and you employ individuals in Vermont. So once you click yes there, you'll get down to the next section. Go down, Sean. Okay, great. So then you can start completing your registration information. So this is the applicant user. You'll be typing in your name, title, role at the organization, email, and password. So you'll want to pay attention to your username. Record your username and password because you'll need that username in order to log back into the dashboard to see your application status later. And that would include, it's been submitted, it would tell you that. It would tell you if it's been marked incomplete or something else needs to be done. So go ahead. Great. So this is the grants dashboard. This is where you'll see either your single application or a number of different applications. As I mentioned, if you had a username for another program, you'll see that other application there, and you will click on new application. That's the one in the right corner there. And that will begin your new application. Go ahead, Sean. So then I'll show you here under status is where you're going to be able to see if it's been submitted or if changes need to be made. So right now where it's in unsubmitted status, you see the action edit. You could have started filling out the application, saved it to begin completing it later. You'll come back into this grants dashboard, hit edit. You'll know it's submitted if under status you see submitted. This is also where if we find that something's missing in your application or needs to be corrected, we mark it as incomplete. You'll get an email. Your status will be listed as incomplete, and that's when you'll be able to use the edit action again.
Perfect.
Go forward.
So this is where the couple people who already submitted, if they rounded down, we will let them know they could go back in here to edit, right?
Great, and I see a question about saving it, so I'm going to try to get to that as we go through the slides.
Great.
So you will, when you get to this slide, this section, it will ask you what is your new application type. You should receive, you should actually see a couple more options than this. You'll select the premium pay. So you'll start a premium pay for workforce recruitment and retention program application. Next. And here we'll ask you to fill out your applicant information. So business legal name and DBA, those should be materially consistent with your Form W-9 tax information, which is the next section down here. Sean talked about going to sam.gov today. That is because we need a unique entity identifier. That is a requirement from the federal government, which is related to the funding sources we're using here as part of this grant program. So you can get that information from sam.gov. It's intended to be a pretty simplistic process, but I know there have been a number of people, Sean, we're seeing a different screen. Okay. We know there have been a number of people who have run into barriers here. We are offering sort of a workaround for people who start the process at sam.gov and have run into technical issues. As you'll see here, we typed in all zeros. The system will accept this. We just will not be able to issue your grant payment until we get your actual unique entity identifier. We do not want this to be holding anyone up from being able to submit their application, but we do ultimately need to get that number for you. So please let us know if that challenge impacts you, but hopefully folks who do not have one yet can get started on that and have it returned from the federal government fairly quickly. Actually, sorry, if you just go back one more time. Could you go back? Thanks. So the Form W-9 tax information, we're going to ask you to upload a Form W-9 as well. So this is really data entry that should match the Form W-9 that you do upload. So please make sure that information aligns. And then I recognize that although the worksite locations for employees have to be in Vermont, there could be a parent organization that has the employer identification number associated with this organization, could be in another state. So you could click other for county if that organization is outside of Vermont. I will note that the system only allows one application per taxpayer identification number, or TIN. So if your organization have multiple branches or sites, you'll want to be coordinating those at a centralized level and submitting a single application under that parent organization. Go ahead. Oh, and I see a question is how can we move forward in the application if we're waiting for unique entity identifiers in the chat? If you expect to receive that number in the next couple of days, then please just wait and you can submit once you receive it. If you're being told there's going to be a delay due to a technical issue, I've heard that from several people, you can fill that with all zeros, and that will alert us that we need to be in touch with you to be able to get that number corrected before we issue grant payment. I've also received, and I'm also seeing in the chat, I'm trying to react to the ones that are related to what's on the screen, that we've had a couple of people indicate that they have taxpayer identification numbers that start with a 0, and the leading 0 is being removed when they go to review. We are working on having that corrected. We expect that to be corrected today or tomorrow. So that should be something that we have full ability to rectify, and we should be able to do that soon. So I appreciate those who, again, started early and made us aware of these issues so that we can resolve them quickly for everyone. Okay. Great. And I'm sorry, could you go back to that last slide, Sean? So this here is if you want to add an additional person from your organization that could be contacted if we have questions or issues, please do so here. This is a very helpful for us if we're just having trouble reaching you. So we do recommend you add a second person from your organization, but it is not a mandatory requirement. So you would just enter and click Save Contact. Next slide. Here's your eligibility information. So the first section is related to your eligible employer type. We really, you only have to select one here, but we really want you to select all applicable employer types related to your organization. So if you were a nursing home, an assisted living residence, and a residential care home, we'd like you to select all 3 of those. The next section is number of full-time equivalent employees. This, as Sean had noted before, is a single whole integer, so you can't use that decimal area. So we are asking you to either, if you're using the old Excel spreadsheet, round up to the next whole integer. If you have not started working on that yet, the spreadsheet on the website will round up automatically for you. So we'll be checking to make sure that those numbers match as part of our review of your applications. We also need you to submit a Form W-9. You'll see a helpful hint here. Your W-9 must be signed in pen, it cannot be more than 6 months old. And another one, it has to be on the latest IRS version of the Form W-9. There's a link to that on our website, and it was most recently updated in 2018. The next one is your summary report of full-time equivalent employees. That is the spreadsheet that Sean was showing previously and we walked through. So we'll need you to upload a copy of that document. The next piece is supporting documentation. You do not need to upload anything here unless we specifically ask you to. So for your initial submission, that can be blank. This next piece is a question for you to answer that's related to how the funding is going to be dispersed. So this grant program runs through June 30th of 2023. You can disperse the premium pay over that time period, so through June 2023. But in order to do that, you would have to select 4 quarterly payments that will be dispersed over the next 12 months. Another option would be to receive a single lump sum payment, but you would have to be committing there to disperse the funds within 90 days. We want to be able to provide payments to you in a way that does not cause a cash flow issue. So we would be giving you the anticipated quarterly amount of funding as that quarter's beginning. But we recognize that some people may want to disperse it all quickly, more maybe in a single lump sum payments to their eligible employees. And we're making that option available to you by selecting that single lump sum payment option. But again, if you select that, you have to disperse it in 90 days. You do not have until the June 30th, 2023 deadline. Go ahead, next slide. So here you're just going to be able to review your application for accuracy. You'll want to check this before you move on. Go ahead. You'll keep moving through. This is again areas that you'll want to check to make sure it's accurate. So here are the certifications. There's a number of certifications that must be checked before submitting your application. So you would need to put a checkbox in each of these areas. And then I can move on to the next one. And then an individual with the authority to make the assurances must type their full name into the signature box. And then it will automatically populate the signature date. So these assurances, if you want to review them in advance, are on a separate Word document on our website. So you can look at them before entering into the application. And then after you click the submit button, you will you'll get this message showing that the application was submitted. You can click on the finish and you should see that it was submitted in your grants dashboard.
What about the leveraging?
Great, I think and there it is. You'll see that it is it's in your dashboard as submitted, and you can view your application by selecting that I and view action. I think that's it.
Great. Yep. Yeah, that's it for that. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. And so we will go now into the flip back into the FAQ portion. I think to go back to the site here. I guess I didn't need to have stopped sharing my window. I can. We're just going to show if you're on the web page again, and see it further down below. As we mentioned, this program guidance link that we skipped over is important. Document answers a lot of the questions. We went through the online application, and last week in here the summary report of FTEs, which is the main part of it. As Wendy mentioned, the list of certifications is available there as a PDF, as well as the Form W-9. And then down below here, we've seen a couple questions in the chat asking the date again. It's going to be June 1st at 12 noon. We will be changing this website here this afternoon to that effect. And up here, the frequently asked questions, last updated May 16th. A lot of the questions we had gotten the first few days we had up here, and we tried to bucket them in the types of categories that they're coming in related to the application and the eligible employers, as we mentioned, being the two that we're prioritizing at this time, while also recognizing that the eligible employees and the disbursement of premium pay are also questions that folks are going to have a lot of questions about. We're happy to talk about, and want to assure everyone that those pieces don't need to be crystal clear in your mind. Now we will be having additional sessions after the application period on those. Related to the summary report of FTEs, I've seen a question was going back when you saw that Word document open when Wendy was talking. I was trying to capture some of the items from chat and juggle while sharing my screen. So we'll get to those, but I did see a per diem one pop up as well, and we did address that question here in the frequently asked questions as far as how per diem employees should be logged. And really, again, they'll be logged either by full-time or part-time, however they equate out to. So I think for the purposes of, for purposes of the calculation, the easiest thing to do is to convert the per diem employee time to 8 hours per day. So if you had an employee who, on average, over that look back period, when I say look back period, I'm referring to your choice of the 12 weeks or the 13 weeks, January to March. So if they averaged at least 35 hours per week, you'd be entering them as the number of weeks they were on payroll on the organization in the full-time chart. If they're less than 35 hours, you're going to put their total number of hours in. So if somebody averaged, if you convert their per diem days to 8 hours per day, number of days they worked, if that comes out to over 35 hours a week in average, log the number of weeks they're in the organization in the full-time chart. Otherwise, put that conversion number of hours into the part-time chart is the simplest thing to do. The other thing we want to, again, try to be as flexible as we can. That's kind of our overarching guidance with everything Wendy and I have tried to do and here with the program, is seeing how we can be as flexible as possible with the application, with the opportunity for people to fill in and apply within the bounds of the state and federal regulations we're beholden to, and the federal grant dollars and the public, integrity, taxpayer dollars, all the pieces attached to that. So where we do have flexibility, we want to allow it. Where we're going to need documentation to show that we have the fiscal integrity and program integrity and are ready for an audit, that's where we may need to be. So in this case, the per diem piece, if you do have documentation that can demonstrate the actual hours worked by per diem employees, then you could choose to enter their actual hours worked instead. So for example, if you can document that per diem employees were working 12-hour days, then and paid on a per diem basis, then it's fine to use 12 hours as the calculation. Again, it would be in that same basis that you're going to be converting it to 12 hours instead of to 8, seeing what that equates to over the average of the look back period, and then entering them into a into the appropriate table, either table 1, the full-time employees, or table 2, the part-time employees. So if you have an employee that you can document works 12 hours every time they're paid per diem, they average out to being working 3 days per week. That would equate to 36 hours per week. You can demonstrate that. You would enter them into the table 1. If there's anything else related to per diem, you can put it in the chat. We're happy to talk more on that, or again in the web form from the website. The other question that I skipped over, I should have addressed here, was sick time and vacation time included in the FTE calculation. And so I think the rule here and the language we tried to use is the hours that people were compensated for as being the crucial piece, that they're working for your organization, they're on payroll, and these are hours they're being compensated for in that quarter. So what that means is if they had sick time, if they had vacation time, you wouldn't be deducting that. If they were a full-time employee, they worked 13 weeks, all 13 weeks of the quarter, it's going to calculate them as one FTE. It's not deducting if they were out sick for a week and took a week vacation in February or anything else like that. We've had other questions come in along the lines of if people are on FMLA, and again, that's similar here. The one thing to underscore for these questions related to overtime, FMLA, for other pieces, is the important thing is to not to double count. As you see, we have those 4 tables there: the full-time, the part-time, the vacant positions, and then that final small one on the number of the vacant position hours filled by a traveler or by a contract employee. And so if somebody was on FMLA and they were paid, for that, and there wasn't somebody filling that position, or the position wasn't advertised, separately, you would be entering them in full time. If they're on FMLA and they're being paid for FMLA, and you're also advertising for that position, you have the position in addition to the role of that person. You have a budgeted position report or other documentation showing it's an open position in addition to the paid FMLA, then you'd be able to enter that in the vacancy as well. But if it's unpaid FMLA, essentially a vacant position, not on payroll, and you're advertising for it, then you wouldn't enter it into both the full-time and vacant position, because that would be double counting. And we'll write this out more in the frequently asked questions to the extent that any of these detailed questions that we can help provide guidance on, we're more than happy to do so. But the overarching rule is to include people in full-time and part-time for the hours they're compensated for in that look back period, and not to double count between all of the tables. The other question that kind of falls under this general bucket that came in yesterday that I don't think we've added to the FAQ yet here is if somebody if they left the end of January and they were paid out for 3 months of vacation time they accrued, they would be compensated. You're putting in the hours of that they were compensated for, but they're the hours you're with your organization. So there was a case of somebody who was a part-time employee. In that case, they were trying to enter that they had worked for, say, 4 weeks, because they were on payroll for 4 weeks and they had a few hundred hours they were compensated for. Because that averages out to more than 35 hours per week, they should be put in the full-time table 1 for the full-time employees. and nobody is going to count as more than 1.0 FTEs for the hours they work. So in that case, we get a little bump for that person bringing their time. If they actually were a part-time employee, it'll essentially bump them up to a full-time employee, but it's not going to be giving credit for those hundreds of hours that they may have accrued, in past years. From the charts here, the several different services and programs that an organization provides, several different services, whether they can include all of the employees within the entire organization. The answer is no to that. As discussed and gone over, there are people who are engaged in work with the programs and residences that meet the eligible employer definition in section 2 of the program manual. So I think a couple kind of examples to call out there. I know Wendy was talking earlier. There may be a parent or overarching organization that's based in another state, and of course it would be fine to list their information, their mailing address as the out-of-state address. But really, this work is focused on work that's being done in Vermont, so just those facilities. So if you have facilities that are based in New Hampshire or Maine or Massachusetts, New York, you get the idea. You wouldn't enter any staff that work at those locations. Similarly, we know there's some hospitals that are based in Vermont. They're Vermont hospitals. They have facilities that might be, say, an adult daycare facility. They have facilities that are eligible employers here. So you would enter all of the employees of those eligible employer facilities, but you wouldn't be entering employees of facilities that that don't fall into the eligible employers. We had gotten a number of questions about the way contracted workers are treated. And again, I think kind of the overarching rule guidance here is that what we're trying to do is calculate the budgeted positions, the budgeted full-time equivalents for an organization. So to the extent that your organization has contractors that are intended to be contract work, your organization isn't trying to hire, say, full-time employees to say to cook meals or to do cleaning. You hire a service to do that. Those wouldn't be open employee positions. You wouldn't be entering them into the spreadsheet here. If, on the other hand, those are positions that you do have budgeted, they are intended to be employees, you have that documentation that they're open positions, they're budgeted for, but because of vacancies, because of worker shortages, you're using contract staff to do that work. Those are the types of folks, those are the positions you would be entering into table 3 for the vacant positions, whether they're completely vacant and nobody's doing the work, or whether they're vacant budgeted positions, but you do have travelers or other contract staff doing that work. Let's see. Do you want? Should I keep going through, Wendy? I haven't been watching the chat as much. If there's, happy to intersperse.
There are quite a few questions in the chat, so maybe we should try to go through those.
Yep, that sounds good. Happy to do that. We can.
Great. I was starting to try to type it. I'm just going to read it instead. Someone asked they wanted to find out where to get their previous grant username and ID. We can ask folks to look in the system for that information. So if you do need that, just please send us an email through our online submission form and we can try to get that to you. I'm just putting that in the chat. Okay. Maybe we'll just start up at the top.
Perfect. And here's the link right here. You probably, sure everyone can find it on their own, but we'll show it
Just
to
make sure
the
you
question submission
send-
form.
Send us sort of the name and email addresses it may be under, and we can find that and get your password reset. And that would get sent to your email address. So I'm looking at the first question is, can you tell us how each organization's allocation will be determined exactly based on the information we are supplying through the application? This is really going to depend on the demand we see on this program. We have up to $60 million to distribute to this grant opportunity. We may need to prorate if the demand or the applications that are submitted exceed that amount. If not, we would be awarding based on the submission that has we've reviewed and validated the amount. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. There's a, would you review where to put per diem employees? You sort of spoke to that a bit, Sean, previously, but you were indicating, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. On that, it's, I think what place you would put the per diem employees are either going to be in table 1 full-time employees or table 2 part-time employees, based on that conversion of the equivalent hours. So again, the default for folks will be, if they're per diem employee, count their days as 8 hours, multiply it by the number of days they worked for the look back period, and the number of weeks on payroll they were in. If that equates out to more than 35 hours per week, put them in table 1 for the number of weeks they were on. If it comes out to less than 35 hours per week, then put them in table 2. Again, in table 2, you would put, for most people, assuming they worked for your organization, the whole look back period, you would enter that 12 or 13 weeks there, and then in the part-time you would enter their total number of hours, being the number of days that per diem times 8. And as I mentioned, if you do have documentation showing that they were working more than 8 hours per day, then you would have the option to use those actual hours with that documentation, but the default will be 8 hours.
Thank you. And I did see someone note that it was saving automatically. So you would, it would save that information in the application. And then when you log back into the dashboard, it would say unsubmitted. You would click to be able to work again on your application prior to submitting. We got another question to talk more about the 2 options for payment. So that is, you have to make a choice in the application. If you choose single lump sum payment, you would get your total grant award when we send those out. So late June, early July is our anticipated date on that. You would then have 90 days to distribute those grant funds. You could alternatively select 4 quarterly payments. This would give you the flexibility to spend those dollars over a full year. Those would need to be spent by June 30th, 2023. But you would be getting your funding in installments. So we'd be giving you about a third of the payment the first quarter, and then we would be doing reconciliation. You'd be submitting quarterly reports, and that would generate your next payment. So what we're trying to achieve here is to be able to get you the funding in advance so you don't have cash flow issues, so that you can then spend those dollars over the quarter. But we're not allowed to give you more than a quarter's worth of payment based on rules and regulations. So we have to either to allow you to disperse it quickly, we have to give it all to you and have you disperse it over 1 quarter. If you would like to disperse it over a year, if you think that is the best way to really promote recruitment and retention within your organization, that's fine. We're just going to be providing the funding to you in a quarterly basis.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wendy. And that's probably one. I think two kind of related questions that have come up related to that. I'm not seeing in the chat here, but we've heard some discussion about related to both the interplay with the public health emergency number one and kind of flexibility. Does it have to be, quarterly? Are you kind of on the hook to not spend your money until the rest of it until next June? And in that quarterly payment option that Wendy was talking about, to that second question, you don't have to disperse it in quarters. How you disperse it's up to you. And if you decide, say in the fall, that you want to spend all the rest of your funding essentially as an incentive to get people to, to start working and getting the premium pay and committing and having a larger premium pay at that time, or any other reason you'd want to have kind of a not evenly divided amount of the payment, you would be able to spend that, and then when you fulfill your next reconciliation report, you would get a larger payment based on what you spent. So there could well be organizations that only get 2 payments or only get 3 payments if they get a really large second or third payment, depending on how they spend out. So we want, again, staying with that theme, Wendy and I have talked about, trying to have as much flexibility as possible to support your organizations while staying true to the rules that we have to follow. The second piece that relates there, we've had some questions about the public health emergency, and as we talked about last week, there's a distinction here, and talk about in the program guidance as well. Many of us that are working in the healthcare field are most familiar with just health and human services public health emergency that had been set to go through July 16th, and we were all kind of expecting it would end then, and we underscored that's not what's at play here. The important piece is the presidential proclamation of the emergency, and that was widely expected to run longer. I think that no one knows for sure what the feds will think. Sort of the smart money seemed to be July 16th on Health and Human Services, December 31st maybe on the broader emergency, maybe going beyond that. Small chance of September 30th. So some folks have heard that the Health and Human Services extended theirs. It's looking like 90 days out past July 16th. Still no word on the proclamation. I think the broader sense is that proclamation would run later. And so those are all, I think, factors that are going to come into your calculus as you might be deciding if you want to do the quarterly payments, so you'd have the chance to have more of a ongoing recruitment and retention hook throughout the year. But we know folks are wondering how that proclamation will come into play. And again, as we talked about last week, there isn't a risk of losing the funds if the proclamation ends. You just have to be careful to pay people who were on payroll for hours worked during that emergency period, which we'll talk about more in those disbursement and eligible employee sessions, but wanted to just dig into it a little bit here as you're thinking about those options of the lump sum versus the quarterly.
And I'm going to try to pick, because I know we have about 10 minutes left, the ones that are most applicable to as many organizations as possible. One is just a clarifier on a question. I made a comment about needing to select multiple eligible employer types if they applied to you. Someone asked if a nursing home should be checking off more than one. That was an illustrative example, just if there was an organization with those multiple eligible employer types, please select them all. You don't need to be selecting something that obviously is not related to your organization. The next one is, how important is it to distinguish between physical locations if all locations are under one EIN number? We're really looking to use that information to make sure, one, that person is working for an eligible employer, and 2, it's a work site in Vermont. So the level of specificity needs to be at the sort of program and location level so that we can make those distinctions.
I see there's the cap that may make a employee ineligible. You know, again, I think we're making the distinction here. We're largely talking about the FTE, and I assume you mean income cap when it says the cap. If that's wrong, you can add that in chat, but assuming you mean income cap. There isn't, related to what we're talking about today with the counting employees and the summary spreadsheet of FTEs, you're going to put all your employees in that. On the other portion where we talk about eligible employees in the program guidance, you'll see the tests, the 3-part tests, and there's 3 options of 3 Roman numerals on there as far as what can make an employee eligible. And so there is an option for that. There is an opportunity for higher income employees if they meet certain job specifications to still be eligible with incomes that are above a cap. But I think for the short time we have here, would refer you to the program guidance, and we'll be happy to talk about that in the upcoming sessions too.
Now, this one's farther down on the list, but it's related to what you're talking about, is this distinction between when you're filling out this application, list all of your employees, right? This is for the purpose of the grant award calculation. Someone asked, how do we handle a part remote, part on-site staff person? For the purpose of the grant application, it's one of your employees, include that employee there. That's the basis of your grant award. We can talk more about how to handle that during the disbursement, but generally, as long as someone has some risk associated with sort of COVID-19 per that test, they can also receive the premium payments.
Great. I'm seeing a question here of if the employee is classified as full-time, 37.5 or 40 hours, but they average less than 35 hours per week for the look back period. Do we enter the employee hours under full-time or part-time? And would the unmet work hours be listed as vacant hours? I think for the circumstances here, I think, and again, I'm not sure of the circumstances for why they'd be averaging less than 35 hours if they're classified as the full-time, whether it's FMLA or kind of unpaid leave or what the case may be. For there, I would just refer back to the point made before. If they're classified and you have the job, the budgeted position report shows them, I think you'd be able to list them as that full-time employee there, just making sure not to double count. So don't enter them full-time and then any unmet hours as vacant hours, or if you've brought on a contract staff or a traveler to backfill some of the time that this employee wasn't working, you wouldn't enter them in both places to double count. But as long as you follow that guidance of going by the budgeted position and not double counting, that'll be solid. And if you have additional questions, feel free to follow up in that question submission form. We're happy to talk additional details. We have, what do we do with, I'm sorry. Okay. Let's see. We have, what do you do with overtime hours by full-time workers? Can we take those overtime hours from all the employees and turn that into to vacant FTEs? Again, the basis has to be the budgeted positions here. So you wouldn't be using overtime hours as a basis for a vacant position. You'd be able to, and because each individual person, can only be the 1 hour 1.0 FTEs. But if you do have a position that's budgeted and you're listing that position and you're just not able to fill it, that would be the basis that you would be entering into the vacant in table 3 for a vacant position. So you would be able to, if you have that on that basis with that documentation, you'd be able to enter them into the vacant FTEs, and it would be fine that you had multiple full-time employees that were covering the work of that vacant position while it was vacant, just like it would be fine to have a traveler in there. But the important thing is that that calculation, that basis can't be this position isn't budgeted, but we have a bunch of employees that are working 50-hour weeks, so we're going to take 10 hours off the top of each of them and call that an employee.
I see a question. If we received hazard pay from the state, will we already have a SAM number? The SAM number is new as of April, so I think you may previously have a DUNS number. I would just recommend going to the sam.gov website on how that would be converted. The federal government has been rolling that out.
Great. Yep, we have a question about on the 12-week spreadsheet, how are part-time full-time equivalents calculated if we're using the 480 hours in the calculation. Not having that math and the number in my head right in front of me. What we have with the both for the part-time and full-time, you are putting in the number of weeks that that people can work, and so that people are working. And so for the part-time folks, if they were on payroll for the full 12 weeks, that would be 35 by 12, 420 hours. If you're putting in 420 hours or more, it'll tell you to put them over in the full-time table 1. If you're putting in less than 420 hours for somebody who's in there the whole 12 weeks, it's going to be dividing those hours by the 12 weeks, by 12 weeks rather than 13 weeks as it was in the full quarter, and then dividing it by the 37.5 hours to give the full-time equivalent in that table there.
I see a question. So if the person's on the spreadsheet because they worked during that look back period, are they eligible to receive the payment? No, that person, and that person no longer works there. Are they eligible to receive the payment? No, they can be included in your spreadsheet for the purposes of calculating the grant award. You then have, it is at your discretion on how you use those funds to provide premium pay to really promote recruitment and retention at your organization. So you could use those dollars to provide premium pay for someone you're recruiting after they've completed work performed, or provide different amounts to certain employees at your organization, but they're not eligible if they've left the organization. And I see we're at 1 o'clock now, so I think what we're going to have to update the FAQs, and we'll do that quickly so that we can have answers to you that are particularly, we're going to focus on the ones that are applicable to the application so that we can make sure that everyone has the information they need to get their applications in by the new due date, which is June 1st at noon.
Great. Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it, and we will be getting this recording up as well as those updated FAQs, as Wendy mentioned. Thanks again.
Thank you.